scary, isn't
I
it?
was
That's
recording
lying
it.
really in the corner.
All right. 6:59. So I'll wait until my computer says 7, just to be, not call it early. All right, so I will call to session the Charter Revision Committee for a, it's not a joint meeting. Oh, I'm looking at the old one. The first meeting of the Charter Revision Committee on October 24th, 2018 at 7 p.m. I'll request everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just pull up the right agenda. I apologize for that.
We have a paper copy of it also.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, perfect. So the first point of business is we'll just review the minutes from the joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen from earlier this month. We'll just check for any inaccuracies. Does anybody have any concerns or corrections for the minutes from earlier this month? All right, then I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, minutes pass. So I guess now we'll go into, I think it'd be easier to have a little more informal conversational component over the charge given to us by the Board of Selectmen and what our impressions are on the issues they brought forth. And then following that, we'll review our schedule. I know there's some concerns about the initial date of the 7th following the elections and some other pieces. So we'll talk through those. And any piece of the charter any of the members feel like need to be looked at or amended or added to. All right, so we'll begin the first part, and I guess we'll just go charge by charge from the Board of Selectmen. So we're not going to take any formal votes or anything. All this will go through the public discussion, the public meetings as well, to just kind of get a sense of the temperature of the committee and where we sit on these issues. And just a reminder, as Matt said as well, this is really a operational and governance board. We're not, political. So if the lens we can look at is, does this really make sense for Bethel? Does it improve the way we operate? Is really should be the mechanism of our support or lack of support. So are there any thoughts on the sections, was it C3-4? Board of Selectmen, Section A, change the term of office to 4 years from 2. The Board of Selectmen is the only remaining elected board with a 2-year term. The term of office should be made 4 years to reflect the realities of the time required to conduct town affairs.
Do we raise our hands for this, or just?
Yeah, I think, it's sure, absolutely, yep.
So I think 2 years is, could be considered a short time for long-range projects. So that might be one thing to consider.
Mm-hmm.
And also, somebody made the remark to me that somebody gets in office, is barely in their 2 years, and they're starting to campaign again for the next session.
Yeah,
There's
the
a number
political
for that.
aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yep. Any other thoughts on that? Anybody would like to share?
I would tend to agree
Sure.
with that position. I have to think, like you say, what's good for the town of Bethel, and I think running every 2 years is exhausting.
Right.
What you have is a selectman who is in the office 18 months, and then all of a sudden he's gotta start worrying about the next campaign and
Mhm.
funding the next campaign and all the things that have to happen, which takes away from the focus on the job.
Sure.
I would consider, and it's probably a rogue idea, but it's consider term limits. At some point, I know some places do have term limits after so many years in office, maybe 3 terms, 4 terms, but if we extend it 4 years, kind of as a compromise, term limits.
I agree with the 4-year terms.
Mhm.
Basically agreeing with all the points that were just said. I think once they get in office, only have so long and they have to run again. I think it's, especially if you look at, it's one thing if someone's run over and over and it's been, just gets reelected, they have the experience. But someone new in the office, by the time they get into the routine, understanding the office fully, it's almost time to run again. I think it just takes away from, things they need to focus on the town. So it just makes sense to do a 4-year term versus a 2.
When is the next term?
Next year.
Next November.
Next year, I mean, it's like we just had one.
We did.
We did.
Not even a year ago.
And I do the comment that, if you have a long-term project, how many things
Right.
get done in 2 years? I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, and that's, being on the Board of Ed, I mean, it's taken us that long just to bring the schools to maturity, not even including, the educating the community of why they need it, so the paperwork and the drawings, I mean, we received the drawings last meeting, and between the 2 buildings, it's 6,000 pages of drawings, so it's not,
wow.
it's things that just happen. I mean, there's a lot of stewardship that needs to go along with these projects. And I know in the past, there's been grants that have kind of sunsetted on Bethel, not so much, I think it was a transition of first selectmen, as well as a transition of the state representatives who got those grants, and it just kind of fell off because the people who stewarded them just weren't in place anymore. So
right.
having that kind of the institutional memory to take advantage of the things that are granted to the town, I think it's worth consideration.
Nick, I'm going to abstain from discussing
Certainly.
this particular one.
Because absolutely.
And as I mentioned earlier, I really have had a couple of people mention this, so I guess it's more of a consensus than you might think.
Sure.
I'd like to say, I'll be that guy. If the form of government is checks and balances, 4 years, if you have somebody, and we've had it in the past, 4 years is a long time to steer the ship the wrong way. And once the ship gets steered the wrong way, it takes 8 years to try to get it back the other way. So if things are going well, campaigns are campaigns. It's part of the job you signed up for.
Yep.
I think 4-year terms are just, regardless of who's in, if things are going wrong, it's a long wait to get rid of them.
Is there any other remedy to that? I mean, are there any kind of impeachment or anything like that? What do you do when you get a win in the office and the town's going crazy?
I mean, I think that, we'll try the minds of the community on this issue as well. And I think we can kind of dig deeper once we get a sense of is this something we should pursue, or, is it, a lame duck. But there's one of the biggest challenges about Connecticut, and I was on the charter revision last time, and our chairman charges each with a different town to review their charters, which made us all kind of pseudo experts of a different community, but it didn't really serve the needs of Bethel because we didn't assess whether those charters served their towns any better than they did ours. We just understood how they governed. And we can pull all that data through the Connecticut Council of Municipalities. But there's also 169 different governing municipalities in Connecticut, and they range from 100 people or hundreds of people to hundreds of thousands of people. And it's everything from the town hall form of government with first selectmen and a board of selectmen, mayoral governments, strong mayoral governments, the town managers who aren't elected, they're hired and they're overseen by a board of selectmen, or even in the town I grew up in, there was a mayor and then a town council, and they had a town manager. So it's basically any argument we can make at this table or anybody can present to us, you can find a community in Connecticut that is governed under that structure of that argument. And so it just, we have to be careful when we go for comparisons, and that's why, my call is that we make the best decision on behalf of Bethel, as opposed to saying, community XYZ, somewhere within the state does it that way.
There's some big, some big cities that have mayors that have a lot more people than Bethel that run every 2 years for their mayor.
Exactly.
And they've got a lot of big, projects, if we wanna call them,
Yep.
so.
And I think, unless it's changed a lot in the last 4 years, I mean, it was a significant portion of the elected chief officials of the community are on 2-year terms in Connecticut.
Right.
Are
And
they?
so it would be interesting to assess if that's changed in the last 4 years since the last charter. But that's, one of the components that fell into the discussion in the last charter revision as well.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong though, when you have like the 3 selectmen are voting on something, you still have 2 other selectmen sitting at the table.
You have one minority and 2 major parties.
Right,
Yeah.
so I mean, if someone was really going off the rails, I would hope that the other 2 would say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
But, I understand
But you're
you.
still calling day-to-day shots, You're
Mhm.
still running
Yeah.
big departments with a lot of employees.
Okay.
Yep.
I think in Bethel, though, we still have, and again, I don't know too much about governments outside
Yeah.
Bethel, but I understand you can really screw things up in 4 years, one person, but I think we also have a lot of control still over our budget, that how it gets voted on, how it's made, and there's a lot of input that way,
Okay.
but
But the first selectman team is
Mhm.
proposing a budget that they're saying yes or no to.
correct. Yep.
But I think in all fairness, they've been overruled on certain things too.
I'm sorry?
I think they've been overruled on certain things. They can propose a budget and ultimately the Board of Finance can say no, the town meeting can say no. So I think that because of a town meeting form of government, all of our electors have a lot of say.
Right, but the first selectman is still bringing a budget, a proposed budget that you work off. You never, if somebody was going rogue and threw a budget out there, you never get cut in half, or you never get 20% out of it because you think he's going crazy, or he gave too much to the town side or too much to the Board of Ed side. There's still a proposed budget that gets put on the table for the Board of, Sharon, I get what you mean, that the Board of Finance then choose on.
Right.
But they don't deviate, too far off of where it is.
Oh, yeah, they have.
Well,
They have.
because they're
If they
reasonable,
want
but
to,
they're
or
reasonable
there's
budgets.
special interest groups that have talked to them during public hearings or whatever. But we still have that
Checks and balances,
opportunity,
I get it.
yeah.
And with the amount of boards and commissions we have throughout the town that are responsible for developing their budgets as well, there's pieces to that. So again, just all things for us to consider as we move forward. We're gonna hear plenty on this issue.
Right.
This will be, probably 70% of the public input.
Yeah.
So any other discussion on that piece? Okay. So eligibility for office. Section B currently prohibits town employees from serving on the Board of Finance, Planning and Zoning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, and Inland Wetlands Commission. Consideration should be given to the following. Include Board of Assessment Appeals in the prohibition, prohibit Board of Finance members from simultaneously serving on any other board or commission to prevent conflicts of interest with regard to funding. Does anybody see any issues with those? Understand the conflict of interest on the Board of Finance piece? Yeah, I mean,
Town employees can serve on different boards then, correct, than what's listed here?
yes, yeah, there's
So
no
if they want-
prohibition
if
of town.
Yeah, if they really want to volunteer, they always could do so, or serve on
Mhm.
different boards.
Yeah, and I mean, like in an example of the Board of Education, if you're an employee of the Board of Education, like Amy Manning, for example, she was hired by the school district and had to resign her position on the board because she can't oversee her boss. And, it's,
But on the other side, you've had town highway department workers being on the board of, on the police commission, which is, it's not,
yeah.
I don't see a problem with it.
Yep.
I think it's pretty cool if you work for the town and you obviously live in the town, and you serve on a board in the town, is pretty cool.
Absolutely. And, you know, and I think another important piece too is it's not simply the elected boards, it's the appointed commissions as well. And those are kind of a different beast compared to the elected ones. I mean, that's more, the Parks and Rec Commission, what else is there?
The thankless ones.
Yeah, yes. Tend to be the library, I mean, there's quite a few, but tend to be a little more docile than some of the elected ones in terms of the vigor and angst that gets thrown at them. Right. So any other discussion on that? The annual town meeting, budget referendum, the non-binding advisory question, do you want me to go over that, or we kind of all understand the yes, no, too high, too low?
I always
Please.
thought it should have just right.
So-
And I would have voted that, I would have said just right on
Mhm.
the education budget. You know, but I mean, there's no, maybe it isn't too high, maybe it isn't too low, maybe it's just, you think
And I
it's right.
think, yeah, and I think that confuses a lot of people.
It
Saying
does.
Too high or too, but what if I don't think it's too high? As you said, what if I think it's just right?
I've had that.
Well, then you don't have to
question.
answer it.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
No, I mean, that's,
I know
Yeah,
you
but
don't
that
have to,
confuses.
but we're discussing
Mhm.
that it's there and we want to change it.
Not everybody even answers them.
that means they probably think it's just right.
Right, I would assume that, or they just don't bother, they don't wanna they don't wanna say.
Right.
Because
I-
having been a moderator and reading the tapes,
Mhm.
I can tell you, it's not half, but it's a good percentage that don't even bother answering.
Mhm.
When I see a reasonable budget, which the last one was a reasonable budget, and I voted yes, I still voted too high. I still think it's a lot of money,
Yeah.
but I think it's right for the town.
Yeah,
But,
Well, yeah.
but it's a question that I think steers a budget, you know? I mean, I always wanna do more with less, and it's a budget, but I'm gonna vote yes, but I'm gonna say, geez, I didn't wanna spend that much. And it gave me the option to do that. Now, if I certainly vote no, I certainly, you know, I'm gonna say it's too high if I vote no, because I'm not silly enough to vote no and too low. But then gives the Board of Finance an angle to go. If the advisory question's not there, in my opinion, and I'm pretty vocal, and I apologize, but if it's not there, if I was on the Board of Finance, I don't know which way to go if it goes down by the third time.
So I like anything that gives the public ways to communicate and give them information. Normally, I mean, if this could be changed to, like you said, just, you know, just right or something like that. But from what I've seen, and not that I've gone to, you know, all the finance meetings and stuff, but it's not followed. There's no consideration given to that, so the input isn't being taken. Now, if adding just right will change that, I'll be in favor of leaving it. Otherwise, I'm in conjunction with, I think it's the next one, you know, I think it's not to change the budget once it's approved. You know, it's more binding than the non-binding question. So, it's as is, if no one's listening to it, I'm okay with removing it. Otherwise, add to it so that it can actually give direction, you know, instead of everyone just doing too high. You know, if it's valuable input, leave it. If it's not valuable and not being used, why bother?
Okay, if a budget goes down,
Yep.
I guarantee the question is one, it's too high. So maybe some
Right.
people don't, but more people answer it's too high than it's too low, or don't answer the question. So that's information that they're using. And
Do
the
they
Board of
use it,
Finance,
or do
if
they
a budget
just kind
goes
of
down-
skim over it like, oh, everyone's just saying too high? Because I've seen them go both ways with when the budget fails. You know, I mean,
I've never seen a Board of Finance
Okay.
put money in
Okay.
when it fails for the first time.
I'm all right with leaving it in, but like the discussion was here, add a third. And I don't know how that works financially, with voting and all that, nor am I gonna consider that. But add that third, so people understand, it's too low, too high, or just right.
Yeah, I'm happy with
You know,
it. I think it's a good budget.
I'm happy with
it the way
yeah,
it is. I'm
because
not
that
saying
gives
it's
more
the
clear
answer,
direction.
but That's the thought, right?
You know, I mean, you still get the people that, you know, will like vote in, always vote too high because they're spending money. But I think if you add that third, it gives a more, focus, more direction and more input. If, like was stated, if the finance board isn't really even looking at that, then I think people are getting more frustrated by even answering it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see some of the data that, Sharon, like, how often is it answered? I think that's helpful.
Okay.
I think part of the confusion too is, when it was enacted, it was a hot button thing to add and everybody was aware of what it was there for. I think as time has gone on and voting rolls have changed and new people have moved to the community, like, what exactly is its purpose? And I think the non-binding part is confusing as well.
It is.
That it's just on the budget or on the ballot simply to offer an opinion, but that opinion has no weight, unless the budget fails and they have to go back to.
People new to the town, and it's the first time they've voted, they are, what does this mean? They
Yeah.
do stop and ask that
Yeah.
question.
I bet they do.
So, and then maybe that's, maybe the suggestion at the end of this is how do we build in an educational component to the register of voters, like, does there have to be some kind of, clear explanation at every polling place or, in advance, like, what is the purpose of this and how does it help to craft the budgets?
The second part of this comment says that they're looking for additional room to be considered on the ballot. Is that, our ballots aren't big enough? I mean, we have enough questions in those on them. Is there an example of how that would happen?
If I may, when the selectmen discussed this item, having the too high, too low is really neither here nor there. We don't feel it provides as meaningful feedback as going to the public hearing and having people verbalize their sentiments about the budget. To use this last budget vote, this last referendum last spring as an example, we had the town budget, the school budget, the capital budget, and then what people really wanted, what we heard in the Board of Selectmen meeting and the Board of Finance meetings, is that people wanted to pull out the turf field and vote on it separately, which everybody was on board with, but we couldn't do it because with the too high, too low, those two questions, there wasn't enough room on the ballot to do it. So and other things have come up in the past where it would be convenient and it would save the taxpayers money to take a local issue and combine it on that. You could put another item on there if you had to, instead of having a one-off referendum, because each referendum costs about $15,000. So really the benefit of making that go away is just more flexibility, which you might not need that often, once in a while. But that's really the driver behind that, is that we didn't think it was meaningful enough to keep it there in terms of being able to use that slot, those two slots for something else.
But
Would you
Matt,
agree?
to your,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would
To
you
your
agree
point-
that, I'm sorry. Floor, go ahead.
Okay. To your point, we have used both sides of the ballot before. So if we had to use the other side of the ballot, then maybe printing costs would be more, but I think we have to think about what the townspeople in Bethel want.
Sure.
Not the registrar saying, oh, we don't have room for it. I think we could find room, probably.
Do you have any statistics on how many people turn the ballot over, though? Like, what's the drop-off when you have items that fall to page 2?
When the ballot clerk gives them the ballot,
Yeah.
the ballot clerk is instructed to say, now there's two sides to this ballot.
Yeah.
So every single person, at least in Stony Hill, I assume it's otherwise, that we tell them. And outside, we have both sides of the ballot. It's on the checkers desk, both sides of the ballot. So they're told numerous times.
I honestly don't remember if I was ever told why we had to stick to one side of the ballot on the last referendum. But I,
Well, I think the registrars, they're very conservative and they don't want to spend any more money than they have to.
okay.
Yeah, but if the vote is 15,000 to a referendum, and it's $500 more to put some more ink on the backside,
Well,
then
yeah,
we need to do that.
Sure.
But so the point I wanted to make was, that was an exceptional ballot. There was a lot of questions, it was very confusing, you had to read it. But that is not the norm. You
Yeah,
know,
it's
that
true.
there was 4 or 5 questions on there, what
No,
to spend.
I
So if we're asking the voters, because it's important to vote, come out and vote, sit in traffic and vote, I think we need to give them every chance we can to express their opinions
Sure.
on what they think is important. They came to the voting booth.
Sure.
I mean, just a thought, I mean, it's non-binding, so there's no legal component to it. You know, I mean, so is there another way we can collect that same information that's not necessarily on the ballot? I mean, I know you get your little ticket, right, and you have to turn it in. You know, is there a way to carry that when you go get your sticker? Is there a bucket that's no and or too high, and the other one's too low? And we'd probably get a better percentage of people actually participating.
Yeah, but you're not behind the screen hitting,
Right.
checking no
That's
or
fair.
yes.
Yep.
yeah.
Right.
If I'm voting, it's my business. I'm not gonna let somebody watch me put
Well-
my token in the no. box.
Absolutely.
But then it goes back
We've
to.
already
not-
got the system in place. We've got computers, we got ballots, and we just need a little more ink.
Yeah, well, but it's the non-binding part, you know, like it's instruction that doesn't have to be followed. I mean, there's no, and the way, because the way we're structured with the town hall meetings, like, people come, I think we've all been to them, you know what I mean? Opinions aren't short at these meetings.
But I think
There
a
are
lot
certain
of
people that
times,
don't like to stand up that do business in town
Mhm.
and say, you know what, I don't like paying taxes.
Yeah.
Or I think that's too much.
Mhm.
Or, you know, little Johnny's getting a little too much at school today. You
those
know?
meetings could be very
That's why
intimidating.
we vote. We don't stand up in public and raise our hand saying, I want to spend this money.
How, John, do you feel that question's like used? Like the information is used from that question though?
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
when these things go down 2 or 3 times, the
Yep.
Board of Finance, they never put money in.
Right.
They always say, oh, look at the school, got voted no.
Okay.
Now we gotta take money out. Or, oh, wow, the school was good, but the town says we gotta take money out.
Okay. All right.
If I was sitting on the Board of Finance, I certainly wanna know if it's just right, yes, or too low.
Okay.
or too
So
high.
maybe the thing is adding that third option versus, and that may clear it up a little.
It's gonna cost another $100 in ink, but I think if we give the voters more chances to express their,
Okay. Any more comment, observation about that piece? All right, so we'll go on to the next one, failure to adopt. This change would permit the Board of Finance to adjust the amounts of both town and school budgets until both budgets pass concurrently. Currently, whenever one of the 2 main budget proposals for the annual ballot passes, but the other does not, the budget that was approved is locked, leaving the Board of Finance the ability to only adjust the one ballot measure that failed. This limitation was originally based on the premise that the town and school budgets are separate. However, the town budget contains substantial Board of Education costs, such as debt service, utilities, school building maintenance contracts, and insurance. The limitations of not allowing the Board of Finance the discretion to adjust both budgets if one fails is a dangerous defect that can leave the town operations vulnerable to serve the losses of the service. The recommendation is to adjust the language so that neither of the bifurcated budgets is considered final until they are both ratified simultaneously at referendum. This will give the Board of Finance authority to adjust both the town and school budget lines as needed.
Can I make a clarification to that?
Yep.
The Board of in hearing you read that out loud, I just realized there's a little bit of an inconsistency because the Board of Finance would not have to change. Say you had one goes up, one goes down.
Mm-hmm.
The Board of Finance would not be required to change the one that went up. It would be their discretion. So
they have the
so
option
that-
to.
They have the option, so, you know, if it was a minor change or something, they could leave that alone and just bring the one that failed to the next referendum.
Mhm.
It's not asking the public to vote on both of them over and over again.
right, no, that's how I accepted it.
Yeah,
That
okay.
the Board of Finance could take, if the school went past and the town didn't,
Yeah,
they could take a little more out of the school because it's adjusting the town side, because of
Yeah.
the facilities.
yeah, right.
So then it would only be the town budget that needs to get ratified
Yeah,
moving forward, okay.
They could take money out and not have to have it revoted?
Oh, no, they would, if they changed
They
it,
all
it would
have
have to be revoted.
Yeah, right.
Oh, so okay, so
If you
that
adjusted
would,
the school side.
And if they
Yeah.
That would
didn't,
trigger-
Oh my
it stays.
God, absolutely.
No, that's, you have to give them the opportunity to vote.
yeah,
But if they decided that it wasn't necessary to adjust the side that passed, they just leave it alone. It's passed, it is what it is, they'd only put the next
Okay.
one up for referendum. And let me just add a couple of thoughts on that too. I envision this as something that would, well, first of all, I don't think in the history of time, any first selectman ever tried to give a Board of Finance more authority, because
Yeah.
usually they want more from the other side, and so does the selectman, you know,
Yeah.
and that's the way it's supposed to be, there's a check and a balance. So the fact that I actually proposed this to my colleagues shows that I feel very strongly about this. What worries me is if there is a situation where the Board of Ed side passed, and the town failed, and the town failed again, and the town failed again, and you're getting, and you can't touch the debt load, the utilities, the insurance, the pensions, all that stuff that's, for the Board of Ed side, that's loaded into that budget. It actually squeezes 20% of the town budget, it locks it, you can't touch it, you can't, so the only thing you've got to go on is laying people off. So, or decimating your highway budget. So if it really got that bad, if it was a real disaster, even the Board of Ed side people might say, well, I don't want to lose 2 cops and two highway workers. We got to balance this out a little bit. So I view this as an escape valve for extraordinary conditions. I don't think it would be used very often. And then secondarily, as we discussed before, it would give everybody another reason to come back to the polls instead of saying, I don't care about that side, I'm just gonna go, I'm okay with it.
But wasn't, when this was split, wasn't the same argument made at that time, before the split?
I wasn't present, I
Okay.
don't know.
What, now you're asking?
When, and I remember years ago, when it was one budget, and when it went to go split, it was
Right.
a lot of turmoil, and I believe
Yeah.
the argument was made the same to the resident of the town of Bethel
Pretty
as
much.
reason not to split it, and it still went through.
They went through, right.
Oh, yeah.
However, just, first of all, I'm adamantly against this. I think it would cause a lot of problems. I think it would divide the town something terrible. If one budget passes, the other one doesn't, and the Board of Finance has the right to go back to the budget that's passed and take a little money out, if they have that right. The other thing is, from working as a moderator at the polling places, and I would love to go back and get the data for you, but if the Board of Ed passes and the town doesn't, education people do not come back and vote to support the town. And I've looked at the voting list, principals that I know live in the district don't come back and vote. And so that's another thing I'm afraid of. You're causing, and you're splitting the town. You're splitting town employees, education employees. Because if one and they don't come back, and it could work the other way. If the town passes and the education doesn't, town employees throw up their hands and say, who cares? I got my salary, I got my what I want. I think it's a bad thing to do for the town. So, no.
Ironically, I was thinking of those as the reasons to do it, to pull them back in.
Wow.
Hopefully, we don't have to go there.
I know we touched on this before, Matt, because you talked about it the last, when we met as a joint committee there with the board. But what concerns me the most was I was unaware that the budget for all the maintenance is all tucked under the town. And that this money is not accounted for on the education side.
Correct.
And I really, really strongly feel it's gotta be like, I worked in corporate America for years and they build it back to the division. So even though the overhead the main office that ran the hospital, the administrative offices, my budget, in my department had to pick up a percentage of that based on the payroll in my department and the volume of work on the department. That's gotta be identified, that should not be like that. And even though the town management administration controls like bidding for fuel oil or whatever it is, I have no problem with that. But I think it's gotta be shown as a line item, as a transfer back in terms of the cost, has to be allocated to the education budget. One of my other thoughts on this is, I was thinking about this, I forget what it costs to educate a student here, it was 17,000 or something like that. That number's false if it's not including all this. Is it including all that?
What number's false?
The number of what it costs this
Total
town
cost.
to educate a student, if in fact the part of the education cost is lights and running the buildings.
Well,
If
when-
that's not in their budget, are you telling me that it's not accounted for?
It's accounted for after the fact, when Terry Yansky does the, what do they call it, the ED?
Yeah,
EDO.
EDO 409, is it?
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
those things, that stuff is all reported to the state, the Office of Policy and Management, and those costs are brought in.
Okay,
I think, but you make a good point, and I know at some point you're going to talk to department heads. I think you should write that question down and ask Mr. Kozlowski about that. Because what I had heard is that those costs are accounted for because school buildings still belong to town of Bethel, even though
Right.
they're under Board of Ed control.
Right.
So, and there's another factor in that we were one of the first towns to combine any operations with Board of Ed. 7 years ago, we combined the IT departments. So it lowered the cost for the town side and improved services tremendously, and lowered the cost marginally for Board of Ed too by sharing resources. But as we go into the future, there's gonna be more opportunities. We're looking at the opportunity to possibly take payroll functions, HR functions over the next few years to do the same thing. So you're gonna have more and more of this melding of budgets that is gonna be easy to split out on the back end when they report to the state, but hard to do in a bifurcated budget. So that's some of the other driver too.
Yeah, but who's gonna take the cost? The town's gonna pay for the payroll or the school budget?
You split it.
you know, you really have to, you know.
I mean,
push
it's
back.
administration, you know, you can streamline that. We're trying to find ways to do that.
Mhm.
I-
I'm sorry.
No, please.
Go, yeah, I'll go on at the end.
I think, once it's voted on and passed, it passed. It's what terminology is, binding question. I think if we could go back and start making adjustments, it almost makes it an advisory question. And I think once people have voted, it passes, I think it's bad, all PR or whatever, if you go in and pull it. I think people are hopefully educated enough to understand what's in the budget and what affects the budget. So I agree. I think the real call here is to actually, working in corporate, I know, my department, I know how much I'm spending on facilities, how much is my responsibility. I think you need to somehow transfer that over and make it aware that way. I think once it's voted on, once it's passed, that should be it. That should be a binding resolution right there.
I think it's gonna create even more discussion than the 2 to 4 year term. I swear.
I think you're
Oh,
gonna do.
definitely.
I think we definitely-
This is the hot button.
We
Yeah.
definitely got to hear from the departments, but I think all the cases made here to unbind the question was actually, I remember big debates about this when it was voted on, and all that came up, and it still passed to do so. So I think that's how the public feels about it.
I was here when that happened.
Yep.
believe it or not.
What was it?
I remember when they divided that up.
Yep.
First time I saw it on the ballot.
Yep.
I remember that.
And lately, and this is a compliment to you, we've been getting reasonable budgets. And reasonable people will vote yes. So when you're referring to where it went down, now we don't know where the money's coming from, those are 7, 6, 5, those are big increased budgets. There was one year, the Board of Ed was a 9. Now, I know we can't control, but there was.
Yeah, sure.
And that's when it gets voted down, and that's when the schoolies, if you wanna call it, and the town people start arguing, well, I want the cops to come to my house, but I can't afford everything, so we're gonna take it out on the school. A reasonable budget gets passed the first or second time, and Bethel moves forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's the committee I chair for the Board of Ed is the resource management, so basically the finance committee working with Ms. Yansky. There isn't no like any nefarious hiding of where money goes. I mean, it's all out in the open. You know, a perfect example, just recently we had to replace the boilers in the middle school. So we have our 460 account, which is the 1% account that we keep carrying over year to year. We were able to tap into that so the town didn't have to open up the fund to cover that. So it's not an absence of partnership. And I think potentially this could negate some of that.
And it always wasn't that way.
Exactly.
That money, that 460 sat there, and we didn't know where it went, and how great it is that 1% fund
is there and it's
kept our
being used
checkbooks
appropriately.
closed.
Exactly. Yep.
That's pretty cool. That's government working.
But and a lot of that comes down to the leadership you have in place and their personalities and their personal values and approach, and to the point where a superintendent was going to come out with a 9% increase and a first selectman is going to come out with a 1.3 or 3.1 or
Absolutely.
like this would force them to be. I'm kind of screwing everybody here if I'm going off the walls, so I think it could create a little more interaction between the upstairs and the downstairs is the way we look at things. So I agree. I think it's going to be a pretty hearty conversation. And we'll get a lot of interesting input on that. Would anybody else like to chime in on that? All right. Next one. Action requiring referendum. Currently, C6-8 applies not only to all taxpayer-funded capital projects in excess of $1 million, but also by extension all capital utility projects not funded by tax revenue, rather by user fees. The referendum requirements come into play even though utility projects have no impact on the town budget and do not rely on the general tax revenue. In the past, a referendum has been required just to approve the acceptance of revolving water loans from the state in order to maintain and improve the town's public water system. Loans from the state in order to maintain and improve the town's public water. Man, I'm a disaster right now. Even in the case where the state has mandated certain repairs and upgrades under penalty of fines for noncompliance, the low limit of $1 million has resulted in harmful delays, expenses of conducting referendums in order to execute non-optional system upgrades. Recommendation is to raise the referendum trigger to $2 million for capital utility projects that are funded exclusively through user fees, grants, or loans. And I think the last half of that last sentence is kind of the most important part of that piece.
I think it's an no-brainer.
Yeah. Any conversation on that? Okay.
By the way, if I can add one other comment
Sure.
on your previous topic. Just as a reminder, if this commission doesn't believe in one of these things, you're not even obligated to put it up for a public hearing.
Mhm.
So, you can kill it at your level.
Yep.
So, don't feel like you have to sit through the slings and arrows if you think it's gonna be terrible and you don't like it anyway, that's fine.
Yep.
I should have been talking more.
All right, so we're good on that one. I'll move on to the next. Appointments by the Board of Selectmen. All members of appointed boards and commissions shall be qualified electors of the town and shall vacate their positions upon ceasing to be electors of the town. It seems pretty clear, and I think a lot of it comes down to some policing within the town committees as well, who may be a little more aware of some of the intimate movements of the members and the appointees.
Well, we had a case where somebody moved out of town and they wouldn't tell anybody.
Right.
Oh.
And so after a year, and the registrars said, we don't really have the authority to take them off the rolls.
Mm-hmm.
And the town clerk said, well, I don't have the authority to take them off the commission until they have to resign. And eventually the individual sent us a letter in which he said, well, now that I live in North Carolina, so he said, all right, bingo, there we go. But we don't really have a mechanism in writing that says, that's what we're looking for.
So this is just an automatic, once they're off, okay.
Yeah.
So when you say they have to live here, I mean actually reside here, because didn't somebody, I just remember this discussion, a tough one at one of our meetings, and it had to do, they said, well, I own land, I still own land in Bethel. So actual residents. is
Yeah,
what
you
we're
have to be an
talking about.
elector I think you guys might wanna check that. I think the wording says elected.
Yeah,
Okay.
ceasing to be
You can
electors,
still
yeah.
vote.
Yeah, if you're registered to
Different
vote
than
here.
residing,
Right.
because you can reside in multiple places, reside's an actual legal term. I think I would prefer going with elector, because you can't be.
So elector basically means you have to live in the town. Is that correct?
I'll defer to the attorney.
You're a tax.
I'm
Yeah,
not-
it's a term.
But you can be a taxpayer, not live in
Meaning
the town.
synonymous with domicile, so.
Thank you.
Okay. So, I mean, like, where you're gonna vote for president is kind of where it comes down to. So you can't just vote in North Carolina in the morning and then fly up to Connecticut. You can do it in Bethel, then head down to Bridgeport.
So, I just have one question on this. I don't know if it goes hand in hand or if it's even possible. What about members of boards who never show to boards and having them removed? Because I know of situations where they get elected to boards, never show up for a board meeting, and you cannot, I wish there was a mechanism, whatever party is, they go to the party first, and then if it's still not filled, like if it was a vacancy. But I know certain boards' hands are tied because members don't show.
I'm sure that's in the
tough.
charter somewhere, but
Isn't
No,
there
no,
something-
just to my
If you
knowledge,
miss
there
so
are
many
no,
meetings?
there are no recall provisions
No.
in state law at all.
Right.
And I'm only aware of one town that has it written into their charter, and it's very complicated. I think it's the town of Milford has that.
is it a recall?
I don't know if it's something that could be included in this section or if it's hands off, so.
Yeah, it's called twisting their arm to send a letter to Lisa.
Yeah.
That's the that's it.
But, and it's, yeah, and there's political tactic as well, to get
Yeah.
Right.
somebody elected who has a recognizable name and then throw
Yeah.
somebody appointed in that, there's
Yeah, I think.
gameplay within it.
Well, no, but they're sending a letter of
Yeah, they don't, yeah,
Right,
exactly.
that's okay,
Yeah.
that's okay with that, because
Right.
somebody's now gonna be appointed.
Appointed,
Yeah.
someone
And
who's
they
there.
show, right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
You know, I'm talking, they got elected and you've never seen them.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yep.
Interesting, okay. So any other discussion on the appointments by the Board of Selectmen? All right, Public Utilities Commission. The recommendation is for the PUC to become a fully appointed board with representation selected from within the utility service areas. Over the past 2 decades, water and wastewater operations have evolved into very technical and highly regulated operations. Management of public utilities increasingly demands a relatively high level of expertise within these fields. Revise the description of the position of Director of Public Utilities to reflect the status as employee of the Public Utilities Commission and reporting to the First Selectman. Duties of the Director of Public Utilities include strategic planning and advising the PUC on operations of the water and sewer departments. Any discussion, thoughts on that?
I'm fine with that, I think I mentioned it before,
Yeah.
is to make sure if it's a fully appointed board, that half is staggered, like, not that they all leave 1 year.
If you remember the discussion,
Yep.
Richie just brought that up, you have the original memo that I
Right,
wrote,
yep.
which didn't capture a change, and I apologize for that. What the selectmen voted on was keeping the 3 selectmen on the commission, but adding 2 more positions?
Yep.
2 more, so you have the 3 elected, then 4 appointed.
Mhm.
And they would be on 4-year terms and staggered. So you have some expertise that carries over,
Yep.
because you get into that 2-year cycle where people can change, and it's been detrimental to utility operations in the past. So I'll get you that description, just send it to you, but that's what the recommendation is. Keep the 3 on the way they are now, but add 2 more positions that are before appointed.
Oh, so it's a committee, it's only 5 of you there now?
Yeah.
So that's just giving you a little more expertise in there,
Yes.
Right.
that's all
Yeah.
it's doing.
I mean, and
And
I
as
think.
long as it's staggered.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and 2 of these provisions, one, the extending the vote to 2 million, the referendum for utilities, and then this one are direct result of us choosing to run our own
Mhm.
water utility.
Right,
So
yeah, you voted not to sell, so.
Yeah, so now we need
That's what
to,
you're doing.
yeah, put the correct infrastructure in place to where.
Absolutely, that's a great recommendation,
All right, Department of Public Works.
the revised one.
Yes.
I got,
Because then she's like, I'm out. Sharon's like, oh, he's gonna be home tonight.
Any other questions on that or concerns, thoughts? Okay. Department of Public Works. This section describes the duties of the department. The recommendation is to remove references to water and sewer functions, which are now contained in the Utilities Department, and add roads, grounds, fleet vehicles, buildings, and project management to the description.
yeah, that's just cleanup.
Clean up.
Right,
Right.
that makes sense.
Technical change. Data processing department should now be information technology.
today.
Codfish too.
So the next one, it's a house cleaning one as well. Technical change, data processing department should now be information technology department. Just an evolution with the times. Okay. Meetings, remove the requirement that all meetings must be held at town hall, which will also allow the police commission to hold its meetings at the police department. In addition, this provision, as is currently written prohibits the planning and zoning and inland wetlands commissions from meeting in the field to perform site walks. The recommendation is to permit all board and commission meetings to be held in a town-owned facility accessible to members of the public. An exception is made for field site inspections for planning and zoning and inland wetlands commissions.
I haven't been to the new police station, but is their meeting room accessible to the public
It's
without
right off the
going?
lobby.
Without going,
Okay.
Yep.
yeah, it's right off the main lobby.
They
walk
don't
right
have
in.
to go through locked doors and all that, okay.
Well, this is a good
Blood
idea,
sample.
because I
Yeah,
really
right.
trouble with rooms.
Breathing apparatus.
Yeah, this place is
Right
good.
out
stuff.
With- yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
They have a big
Really
orange
nice.
with nothing. They gave me theirs.
And just a little history on this, on the last charter, there was a resident who had a lot of concerns about the police department and the way they went about their business. So this was a solution the committee came up with, and clearly we kind of overlooked some pieces of it. So
Yeah, okay.
that was the old station as well, who didn't have adequate meeting space. I mean, and the police department will admit that themselves. I mean, it's why we have a new one. So, you know, the new facility mitigates some of those concerns. And two, clearly we kind of overlooked some of the unintended consequences of putting this in place. Terms in office, technical change to his or her. All right. References to newspapers. Change the word newspapers to publications to allow greater flexibility and publication of legal notice. New charter item. With regard to capital construction projects, the Board of Selectmen approved the request for the Commission to consider a requirement that any project at a cost of $1 million or higher be required to have complete construction plans, blueprints, and all that. Oh, that's completely different. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm sorry.
Yeah,
wanted-
yeah, I
wanted to
skipped it.
debate the other one first.
Yeah, so
Or
let's
not
do,
debate it, encourage it.
yeah, the newspaper one.
Right.
Yeah, let's just open up for some discussion. And
So Nick, can we do it?
That's a question I gotta look at, because we looked at that in the last charter revision,
Mhm.
and the problem is that there are a lot of old archaic state statutes which reference newspapers appearing in general circulation. So we have to query whether or not that change that provides broader flexibility is in contradiction to any state statutes that may apply. That's one thing that my job will be looking at with everything we're doing here. And I know that this is a good change, in my opinion, because I deal a lot with newspaper notifications in my line of work. But this one will require some research on my behalf.
So what exactly would this allow or change for us?
Well, right now, I mean, the biggest heavy cost is newspaper publications. It's how newspapers are actually staying alive. I mean, in all honesty, they charge an arm and a leg for, you know, a little blurb in a legal notice. And when some legal notices that the town have, I mean, Matt can attest to them, are very long. I mean, even when we put the charter changes in publication, which is a requirement of state statute, you're talking thousands of dollars on a notice. That no one, I mean, people in the know and in the business go to the legal section of a newspaper and may pay attention to the legal notices, but your general lay people do not.
You don't think the older people still, I know
No,
some that
they
do,
they
so.
still, I mean, people involved in government,
Right.
people who are used to that form of publication may still, but I think the last charter
Mhm.
revision says that there may be a way, albeit online or anything like that, to reach more people with the notice, which really that should be the point of
Yep.
the notice, is
Yep.
to reach as many of the public as possible.
So would we be looking to totally eliminate the newspaper or add to
No,
the
I think,
notification?
I think the change, I mean, my initial read and my initial reaction is that this would be okay, but it might not be able to be instituted, because you can't contradict the state statute. And they've been looking at certain state statutes, and the problem is with everything, you know, if you change one thing in the charter here, that may implicate another thing in the charter. So really for a legislature to go through all the state statutes that require a notice in a newspaper and change it, someone's got to do that exercise eventually, and it should already happen, but
Nobody wants.
we just can't contradict state statute is my only concern.
People
So
don't
are
get
you thinking like the
newspaper
penny
anymore.
saver?
That's,
Well,
There's-
That's
it's a
the,
possibility,
the point of this is to use penny saver more,
Mhm.
because it's less expensive and it goes to every household.
Right.
And the town of Brookfield does it already.
Yeah, I know.
But what are those that don't read the penny saver but read the paper?
You have just as many the other way.
I think it's.
Yeah.
Right, but you're
I think
eliminating
have
a
to-
Well,
group
no,
to add
that's why,
another group.
that's why we're trying to make it or Nick's gonna tell us it's good or
Right.
not.
Right.
You know, planning and zoning,
That's what the coupons
wetlands,
are.
the building department should be user-based fees and pay for it.
Agreed.
When we do a public
For
hearing,
dinner.
part of the application, it's $250 to do public noticing,
Right,
but it's probably $500 or $600. So you and I are paying for Toll Brothers to do a legal notice to build in our town. And,
okay.
you know, either we raise the rates over there or we figure out how to reduce the cost of the legal, you know.
I mean, I definitely, I'm sorry, go
No,
ahead.
I just
Dee, I
wanted to
can-
give you an example.
Yep.
So today, I put a public notice in the paper on health department fees. It was over $3,000. So those are the kind of numbers that you're looking at. And
In
it
the
was
Danbury News
just-
Times?
Mhm, Danbury News Times, and
Right, like
that's,
school books.
you know, that's pretty much where you're looking.
I'm just concerned about if you stop using, I mean, I'm fine with using other mediums to get the word out too. I'm just concerned about eliminating one source of information for people and they're not gonna get it elsewhere just to grab another group that doesn't read the paper.
Well, you know.
Trade-off.
To that, when we used to have a hometown paper,
Mhm.
whatever you called it, I don't know what the last
Bethel
name
Home
was.
News.
That's the only place we used to put the legal notice.
Right.
And it was pennies. So not everybody read the
Okay.
Bethel Beacon or whatever,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
that's kind of what we did, and that's how we legally got away with it, right? And then that went out, and then the
Right.
News Times said, oh, now I
Right.
got you. You know, it just doesn't seem right.
There's only 2 people on my Irish Short Street, only 2 people on my little street newspaper.
4 of you live there.
All 4 of us, and we share the paper.
Everybody gets it.
I'm all done with it.
But no, I mean, I think it took me a while to figure out they were putting things in the penny saver. Someone said,
Right.
didn't you see it in the penny saver? I said, I thought that was just an advertising thing. I was tossing it
I used to
around.
think
Yeah, I don't read
so,
the penny
right.
So
saver.
now I look at it, but I'm thinking in the future we have to think through other electronic means because,
Mhm.
you know, if people wanna get all those notices, we could just say, okay, we have a sign up that, here's the sign up and we'll make sure you get them via email or something because I don't think we can communicate well with people anymore because they don't get the paper. And they don't probably read the penny saver, even though they get it, everybody gets that, as far as I know, and I don't know if we're communicating as well as we could in today's environment, that's all.
I mean, if anything, this puts us in position, if state legislation were to change,
Have the
it's
flexibility
proactive,
without
yeah.
having to wait 5 years on another
To change it.
charge.
Yeah.
Well, the big question is, how does the town of Brookfield do it? They're
Why?
doing it right now.
Again, I'm gonna look into the legal aspects of it, but unless anyone, I mean, it's gonna be okay unless you get called on it too, so.
That's being a grieved party, right?
Right, yeah.
I will pass along something, and I will pass this along because I'm not speaking out of school. The town attorney, Marty Waller, has stated this publicly twice
Yeah, right.
in town hearings, that the town of Brookfield just did it without checking with their town attorney. And the attorneys in our area feel that Brookfield is not consistent with state statute.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, they're putting themselves out there with that one.
Well, like Nick said, I mean, until somebody complains and calls them on it, you know, you can, no.
And this goes back to word Bethel, and I can think of 3 people who would
I'm gonna
Yeah.
ask-
do precisely that.
What would it cost to do mailings? It's
No.
$3,000 to do
Oh.
one notice.
Direct mail.
Less
We
people read that.
sometimes, when we do a direct mail postcard, like for, you know, for a vote for a referendum, we send it to postal patrons, so it goes to every mailbox. I think it's around $9,000, right? And if it's a letter, if it's something more than a single postcard, then it's more than that. It could be 12, 13, something like that.
And we do legal notices, in probably all departments, 3 or 4 a week.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
I don't
so-
think that people realize how
Yeah, but if
many.
you do 3 or 4 a week in the News Times, and
No, I
one
think-
costs $3,000.
Well, that wasn't very
Well,
No, I'll give you, for instance, PUC had published the assessment for Stony Hill. It cost us $10,000 to put that in the newspaper. 10,000.
And that,
But-
and then legal notices are lengthy and legalese, you know, they're not short on words and letters.
What
and
did it
that's-
cost to put in other publications? I keep hearing about the News Times, but what about, I'm thinking Bethel Beacon.
They don't have
We
it.
don't
Yeah,
have
no,
one.
there's no other print.
Shows you how much I use the
Yeah.
Bethel
Well, then
Beacon.
We don't have one, that's why.
Pat, when we had
Right.
the Bethel Beacon, we were able.
Not the, I'm sorry, Bethel Patch or whatever that.
Well, there's
Do
not,
they
it's
have
not
a-
a newspaper.
It was the
It's
Bethel
only-
Home News.
Yeah, that's only
Yep.
online, isn't it?
I mean, and
Yes,
this
the
might
patch
be,
is online.
Yeah.
this could be part of the issue why it hasn't really been pushed in Hartford, because every town, I mean, Newtown has the Bee, you know, where I grew up, there's the Willamette Chronicle, I mean, they're much more affordable, you know, papers. And then, you know, News Times is part of a much larger conglomerate.
So then you're thinking like the Penny Saver or something, what's it cost? I mean,
Probably hundreds compared to thousands.
is that what it is?
Yeah, I mean, all the campaigns use them, I mean, you see everybody's
Yeah.
pictures
Yeah.
on the back of them, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
throughout the, so.
Most state statutes will reference to be published in a newspaper with general circulation within the municipality. Then you get a legal argument over what's general circulation, and so.
Well, I'm sure you could argue penny saver then, I mean, with that description,
Yeah, you
Yes,
could, you could, I mean, because it does fit.
right?
That's far more circulated than the News Times.
Mhm.
It is.
Right.
And then is it a debate of what content does that publication
Not a
carry?
newspaper.
I thought that'd be
Yeah,
newsworthy,
that-
right? I mean,
That happens too, because some people consider that a flyer, not a newspaper.
Yeah, it's more.
A newspaper has a general definition that appears in case law. And, you know, it's
Newsworthy, yeah.
established for a couple hundred years, whereas a flyer is an advertising
I
piece.
was telling my mother.
So, you know, where's the dividing line? It's up for debate.
Okay.
But you're saying, Nick, if we put this in there and then the state
Changes, we're,
statutes
yeah,
kind of caught up with it, then we were ready to go.
yeah, we don't necessarily have to wait for the next charter revision to, you know, we can just,
Okay.
Yeah, it provides some flexibility in the future, should that come up.
Does the Penny Saver give you any extra copies? Can you get extra copies to, like, to sit here?
Yeah, they're all over the parking lot, the food bag.
Well, no, what I'm saying is, if we do go to that, we need to educate the people in Bethel that this is where it is. You know, there's ways to educate them, I'm sure. People can talk about it at meetings, you can have some out here, and it's, people get used to looking for them.
We could do a $3,000 legal notice.
There you go. We are now legally at the Penny Saver.
I just don't want to eliminate one group from knowing to add another.
You're
group,
absolutely
that's all.
right. I agree with you.
That's a good point.
okay, so we good on that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so the new charter item, with regard to capital construction projects, the Board of Selectmen approved a request for the commission to consider a requirement that any project at a cost of $1 million or higher be required to have the complete construction plans, blueprints, and all other engineering specifications completed prior to scheduling referendum for final approval.
That was awesome.
I think that makes
Get a big
sense.
star for
Makes
that one, guys.
sense.
Might as well know what it's gonna cost. And I'd rather spend a little more to figure out if I could afford it or not.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
Thank Mr. Zakowski and Mr. Straight for that one.
I never give Paul credit, so Rich, you got it. I was trying to keep him on his toes.
One thing.
But it takes so long from the concept to construction, and there's just too much time in between estimating the way the things escalate.
Well, you have to have engineered plans before you can figure out what the AC is gonna cost, right? I mean, so a picture doesn't tell me what it's gonna cost.
Oh, they go by square foot. If the building's so many square foot, they have historical records that it's costs $5 a square foot to put a sprinkler system in, or, you know, and that's how they estimate it.
Right.
Yeah,
And then you get into the final
right, but
design,
then you, right,
and then it goes through the roof.
right, exactly.
Okay, any other questions, concerns about that one? All right. Are there any charter issues? I know we just got issued our own personal charters tonight. Any issues members of the commission would like to review that they have concerns about? They've heard concerns from our constituents that would like to be addressed?
I've had, I have a couple things. One is,
Sure.
concerns I've heard from the public, and I myself have, people pointed things out to me when we advertise jobs in the paper, that they feel it's nepotism, or that they're creating the job to meet the person they wanna put in the job. And as an example, there was a job posted, I think it was in the tax assessor's office, and the salary was over $60,000 when you mathematically figured it out. And it didn't even require a college degree, it was a high school diploma. Nor did it require, it was a person working towards a certificate. Someone brought that to my attention. It's the second time that's happened where someone said, you know, what is going on? That they just plop these salary rates down. So I actually was curious, and I went online and searched to see competitive for that job, you know, and it wasn't overpaid compared to what I found online. Because I'm not the person involved in human resources here, but I've heard questions about how that is done. Who is making the decision on what the salary range is, and why are those jobs so specific? It looks like it's a person that's already employed by the town, which it turned out that one was. So I've had a couple people say they feel that town hall never really has a job opening because they always give them to somebody they know. And it's not really posted, and in the sense that it's not really out there. They've already made the decision before it's done. So I think we need to look at that area more closely on how we handle it, and whether or not we should have rules like I've always seen in the places I've worked concerning nepotism and some of those other issues. Just because someone's brought that up to me several times.
Sure.
Well, if I can comment on that, I'm not sure that that's appropriate for the charter. It would be, I think, more an ordinance. But we already have regulations about that, both in terms of policy, HR policy, and I think an ordinance. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look at it. But those job descriptions are approved far in advance, and they carry from one position, from one person to another when it's vacated, and they're actually vetted through the union. They're part of a negotiation process. So, and the hiring is done by a committee.
Well, I would just say that it's out of sync with the world. I mean, these are 35-hour-a-week jobs, correct?
Yes.
Most of them.
Well,
The rest
yeah.
of the world's at 40, where I work.
It depends. Some of the jobs are 40. Some are 40.
Many
Depend.
corporations are.
There's a difference.
When I extrapolated what I saw as a rate in the paper for that job into a 40-hour work week, I said, my God, you don't even have a 4-year degree to do that? I mean, I couldn't believe the salary.
If we can have we can have Phyllis, the HR person, come. No,
Is she using the Hay organization? Who's she using to grade these jobs? Because
She-
I went online and found different numbers.
she uses data from CCM and her own benchmarking. She'll call other towns. Benchmarking is a lot harder to do in the public sector because the turnover rate is lower. So you get over time, especially when you have a unionized workforce, you get people who get cost of living increases. So you can find 2 towns, just to use the assistant, the assessor. That's not the assistant assessor's position that you saw. That was the assessor clerk.
That's right, it's over
Yeah.
$60,000 a year for a clerk.
That's
It all depends on what
I-
the clerk
I-
actually does, though.
I know, when
Clerk
we read
is-
the description
they
though,
all-
it wasn't
I
really,
mean, but the clerk can get in that job and, I mean, and do a lot more than is actually in that job description.
well, it should be in the job description.
I'm gonna check that, because that doesn't sound right.
Yeah, well, look at that, but people brought that to my attention. They showed me, the person actually cut it out of the paper and showed it to me, and I said, are you kidding?
Well, did they call, or did they apply?
Right, yeah.
I have no idea, but I do feel there's a sense that there's, you know, where are they hiring these people from? I mean, I finally asked somebody, and they told me it was one of the town employees that they were promoting. I don't know who it was.
Those are all posted, I guarantee it, that is an ironclad policy. And there's a procedure, when there's an opening, it has to be posted internally for 10 days.
Mhm.
And if there are no internal candidates or no qualified
Right.
internal candidates, then it's published
I
outside.
understand that, I'm just
Yeah.
saying that I've heard it said,
Yep.
and I've thought about it a lot, and then having worked in human resources for many years before I switched over into finance, and having worked with grading jobs
Mhm.
and pricing jobs, and doing all those for the many years that I did, I was very curious, so I went online and searched through for that type of job. And I said, you gotta be kidding me.
I'll send
Well,
you,
you know,
I'll send you a link to the CCM database,
Mhm.
because that's primarily what we do.
Yeah.
We also find that job descriptions vary tremendously
That's
between towns. So you could have assistant assessor or assessor's clerk,
Mhm.
and their duties and responsibilities are vastly different. One might justify a salary of 40, one might justify a salary of 60, depending on what else they do. You can't really tell without looking behind the scenes, but, I mean, if any, please feel free to refer any calls to my office. I'll be glad to hook them up with Phyllis so they can see.
And is Phyllis a union employee? I'm just curious.
Is she what?
You said the union has to say in what the rates are?
They're negotiated, yeah. That's under Connecticut public sector labor law, that's one of the 5 mandatory subjects of negotiation. But no, Phyllis is not a union person, she's our HR director.
Mhm. So it may not be part of this, but that was something that people have asked me.
Sure.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't think it needs.
I'll have the conversation with anybody, well,
Yeah.
no problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, all of us, when we signed our charge to be members, I don't know if Lisa said it to you guys, but she's like, I want to stay elected instead of appointed or hired. In my preference, I would love to hire because you can't find a better town clerk, and the amount of money the town's invested in her personal education to be put on the whim of a election, you know, something funky happens, like, that's throwing a tremendous resource out the window, both fiscally and you know, her talent and capability. You know, so there's a uniqueness too to some of these roles that may not necessarily be reflected in the, you know, the college education, but the specific comprehension of Connecticut law and statute that the towns funded their training, or we're poaching from another town who funded their training, and that we are gaining the benefit of that, you know, education as well, competency.
That's kind of an interesting thing, that I did a lot of study on the history of town meeting form of government, and how it evolved from church governance from the 17th century, you know, into the modern age.
Yeah.
And at one time, all of the the key department head positions, so the clerk, the tax collector, and the assessor were all elected. And there are still a few towns in Connecticut that still elect I don't think there's any left that do assessor, but
Yeah.
5 or 6 towns still elect the tax collector. And then over the last century, you know, those towns have looked at those and said, no, we need qualified people that are certified, degreed, you know, they've got a state license, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So they've moved those into appointed positions, so you can hire the people that you need to be in them.
We did that 40 years ago. They were all elected.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know there's, you know, an annual week-long assessor school up at UConn, you know, that all assessors and assistants, you know, attend to. And Connecticut loves to change law, so it's a lot to keep up on. Any other issues any of the other members would like to take a look at or address or have a conversation about? And this can be, not tonight is the final time to
Right.
offer
Well,
your.
should we discuss this on the town meeting, who conducts this next meeting with the public? How does that happen?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that'll be the next piece. If we're done,
I just have a couple, I
Oh,
don't
sure.
know
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
it pertains.
we'll get to that.
I'm just thinking in the past, like, for, public meetings for like the wetlands, it's been, you know, asked before. Right now, notifications get sent out by the applicant to a certain radius around the property. People have, you know, stated that, you know, if I didn't talk to my neighbor last night, I wouldn't have even known about this. I don't know if it's a preview of the charter to, if like applicants can actually post a sign saying public hearing or so, if there's a public hearing, not an applicant, but a public hearing. I don't know what's felt about that.
I can comment on that,
Okay.
because I'm a land use attorney.
Yep.
And a lot of municipalities have been going, posting of signs, you
Yep.
know, and there's sign companies that just make, you know, just
Right.
like the liquor
Liquor
commission.
commission.
Right, it doesn't have to be, it's just some type of
It's
notification.
generally done not within the charter, but within the zoning regulations.
All right, so that would be it, okay,
It'd be a text change to the zoning regulations.
okay. Some people I were talking to, they call it large vote, where large projects, you know, like in the past have been grouped together, where if you want one, you have to vote for the other, or the other two. You know, if we somehow could avoid having that happen, where if you want, you know, each one should be separate, so you don't have to feel.
At a certain financial
Standalone.
threshold, they have to be.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll use the example that was given to me, what was the library, fire department, and school. If you wanted one, you had to vote for the other two. They felt locked in, you know, so.
That was with the Berry construction at high school.
That amazes me. That's been 25 years.
And that's,
Yeah.
everybody
We're still
knows
mad
that
about
one.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well,
what
because the
it is.
schools wanted to vote for Barry, but the firemen wanted to vote
Yeah.
for the fire truck, you know?
Yeah. It was just brought up to me, so I don't know if that's something in charter, I don't know if there's a, like, funding reason it's done that way,
Yeah.
but since it was brought to me, I wanted to just.
Was it 25 years ago?
That was 25 years ago?
Yep,
Really? I'm old.
yeah, it was.
20.
Richie, you're
No,
getting
no,
old.
it-
It was on the committee.
Yeah.
No, 18 years ago. 18 years ago.
No.
And the other thing that was brought up is, Tom's been doing a lot and doing a great job of bringing in apartments, especially like downtown, focus in the downtown. Just people have voiced concern over utility-wise, like water meters. It's only given to the landlord. It's hard to pass that expense on to the tenants unless you could split the meter, meaning,
That's a.
that's a PUC, okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's an ordinance or.
That's not a charter thing,
Yeah,
that's
it's
why I
not a
didn't think,
charter
but
thing.
that's what was brought to me, so,
Yeah.
that's it.
A question for the finance board when they come. People had heard that the Board of Ed had this this fund that they have kept, and when they didn't spend all their money on their budget, and this is how they're getting their boiler. And other departments want to know if they couldn't have the same thing to help offset something that they might want. That, you know, they didn't think it was just fair that the Board of Ed got to do that when all the other departments.
I'm pretty
When the-
sure it's
What-
a state
what
statute, it's a
statute?
product of state statute.
The force, yeah.
That what,
The-
only
the
Board of
first
Ed
SEC
can
account.
do it?
The ability, yeah, the Board of
Okay.
Education is allowed to do that by a specific state statute, that, because I remember that being brought up in the last.
So Park and Rec or the fire departments or any of those couldn't do it? It's just
Well,
not addressed.
Not necessarily,
Right.
but the Board of Ed is specifically addressed, and there's a mechanism for it in state
Okay.
statute.
Okay.
Well, if I can add to that, any department within the town side, if they have an emergency, they can make a request to the Board of Selectmen, and who can then pass a request on to the Board of Finance. And it's been done in the past. We
But
did
they
it-
were, okay,
they
I
did it-
understand.
Yeah,
But they were looking at it as perhaps an incentive to be a little bit more frugal during the year in their budget.
mhm.
Or the devil's advocate, the incentive to
Make a higher
inflate your
budget, so, yeah.
So you have a little bit to
Well,
sit on.
it's gonna work both ways.
Yeah, yep, yep. Yeah, I mean, I think it's something we discussed, and we can, I can certainly pull out some of the state statute on the 460 account. And it's, you know, it is one budget, the Board of Education budget, but we do have, what, 5 schools, you know, I mean, so there are departments within the
Right.
Board of Education budget. I mean, it's the most, with 2/3 of the total town budget. So while it is a single number, it's not just, you know,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Nick, I don't know if I
Sure.
can really talk because Matt's here too, but, you know, I'll give you, for instance, the fire department, or a big line item, you know, we're looking at $750,000 for fire trucks. Try to save a little bit each year for that, so I don't know if that's a Board of Finance thing, or that's something that has to go through a charter thing, just as we were talking about. You know, your road departments, you know, you're buying a truck that's costing $250,000 today for road sweepers and things like that, so.
But doesn't the town in general have some sort of reserve that they constantly, that they keep funded for emergencies and things like that?
Well, for emergencies, these aren't for emergencies.
Yeah, these are for,
You're talking about the sinking funds that we talked about before. That's a finance board policy.
Policy.
They can, yeah, they can do that, they can set that up, we just have to have room in the budget to put it in. Are you guys familiar with that concept, sinking funds?
No.
that one.
Basically, it's like setting up a escrow account for a specific purpose, so we did a study a few years ago that said, that looked at all of our fire apparatus, projected out when each piece would need to be replaced, projected out future growth in the town and what kind of apparatus we would need. So they said, if you want to have money set aside for those things, so you don't have to go dip into the general fund or sell a bond to buy a $1.5 million fire truck, if you set aside $250,000 or $300,000 a year and just carry it forward and let it gather interest, when you get to the year 2025 and it's time to replace the old ladder truck, you've got money in the bank for it. And a lot of towns use those, but they're difficult because you have to take a pretty big chunk of money and put it in the budget that you're not gonna use for several years down the road.
And you're struggling with putting an operating budget
That's
together
right.
at 2%,
That's
and all of
right.
a sudden now you're looking at another digit.
That's right.
And it's,
Yeah,
and
it's
it
hard,
doesn't sell. right?
it's hard to do.
It's hard to sell $1.5 million truck to.
Well, or 300 towards it in one year, because
Yeah, right.
in the percentage of budget, it's a lot of money.
You know, kind of on the same topic, but I guess more specific to Park and Rec. If they were to build in a capital fee to registrations to kind of fill a kitty, so it's not just starting from zero when they want to redo a park or the bathrooms of the gym here, would that be a charter issue, or would that be a?
No, that's a same thing.
An
It's a-
operational, okay.
Yeah, it's a sinking fund that could be set up through Board of Finance
Yep,
for
okay.
capital.
And I don't think
It
that's
could
fair to the
actually-
family.
What's that?
I don't think that's fair to the family. That fee you're talking about is a user fee to make sure there's a coach and make sure you have the soccer team.
No, I
Capital
understood.
improvement like a bathroom, I think it's my responsibility, regardless if I have kids or not, to improve a town facility.
Certainly, yeah. But I mean, it's something Danbury employed up at Richter Park. I think it was like $3 per round. And they've been able to put in a practice range and do quite a bit of significant work up there for depreciating assets that they never would have been able to go to the town for. You know, now that they went in with a little more revenue for themselves, and it was more amenable to the town council.
I think a soccer team keeps the kids straight and on the right path, and I think Richter Park,
Oh, no,
playing
yeah.
around the golf is.
But at the same time, I mean, anybody who uses the Park and Rec facilities, I mean, Nick and I donate plenty of our time and pay to do it. They could be better, you know, and we don't really have a clear vision of when they'll be better, and things don't heal themselves, you know. So, you know, looking at opportunities to expedite that process, and you know, having been in fundraising my entire career, you know, you're always going to get a no if you don't ask, and you know, it could just be an optional check, you know, or it doesn't have to be, you know, a mandated fee, but something where you could, you know, through your registration, participate, you know, in the correction of some of our facilities. Okay, any other concerns or thoughts about the upcoming charter revisions or, right? So now we'll move on to, we looked at, was it November 7th, I think it was?
Right.
Which would be the day after Election Day, Sharon, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's Captain Dwindell's is being honored that evening as well.
Commander.
Commander, sorry, yep.
So are we talking about public hearing?
Yeah, the public hearing,
All right, so
whether that,
just to note, we need to build 10 days notice period.
okay. And that's business days?
Yeah. Or no, 10 days, just 10 days.
Just
Calendar.
that calendars,
10 days,
okay.
calendar days.
Okay, so then that would have to be,
Then you have to
yeah, we
consider
have the
it,
time
yeah.
to do that.
Do you want to cancel your regular meeting for the 7th and do the public hearing on the 14th, or do you want to do it another night from Wednesday?
Yeah, I will also note, this was a good brainstorming session, but
Mhm.
we, before you guys start any substantive work on the charter, you should have your initial public hearing to get public comment.
Yeah.
Um,
So then we don't really need the meeting on the 7th. We could go right to the public hearing on the
Yeah.
14th. Is everybody comfortable with
Yeah,
skipping that
absolutely.
first
We need to
November
take
meeting?
notes, we need to listen to
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, I mean, because thinking about that as well, I'm sure I probably had it in my Board of Ed email, but it's something Melanie or I should probably be considering as well with the,
Are you saying the public hearing will be December 5th? or?
no, November 14th, right?
Oh, November.
We're gonna go off schedule and do a
Okay.
public hearing on the 14th.
So basically, this evening replaces November 7th. And then we'll do the public hearing, get the input from our fellow citizens, and then chart the course from that.
I have a question about
Sure.
the public hearing. So with this type of public hearing, do we state everything that we discussed that we would like to consider, or do we do it in sections? As far as the agenda?
So the first one will be soliciting public comment based on what the Board of Selectmen presented to us.
Okay, that's what
And then-
on everything.
It's part of
But,
the legal notice.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
but issues that are of concern to the electorate, they can bring to our attention as
Right.
well, that they want us
Right.
to address.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we covered everything in the first meeting or it was done in sections.
Yeah, no, yeah, so, and then from that will help us kind of form which charter revisions we want to
Right.
pursue.
Okay.
And then be able to devise that structure that Ms. Craig referenced earlier in terms of inviting department heads and,
Right.
you know,
That
other,
would
you know,
come
at
later, right,
a more specific and strategic time, just so
Right.
it's not,
right,
you know,
right.
So you,
Open season.
You, the commission, is required during this process to hold 2 public hearings.
Oh,
And the purpose of those public hearings is really different. The first and initial one is really an intake on what the public might want to see your job entail. That really shouldn't involve questions, because you guys aren't going to have any
Yeah.
answers at this point in time. However, the latter one, or at least you have to have one more, you can have as many as you want, but public hearings can be grueling, so.
And they're only $2,000
well, that's, yeah, that's
a
right.
legal
We
notice.
just- yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the last one is actually after you have a draft report.
Oh, okay.
And that's when you're gonna be fielding a lot more
Right.
questions.
So do we really have to tell them what the selectmen have told us?
Yeah, it's
It's
already
in the
public
legal
record,
notice.
yeah, it's,
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Because some of these could get pretty,
oh, they will, I mean,
Discussion.
there'll be some exhaustive meetings, I mean,
Okay.
and we'll hear
okay.
every
So this
angle
is
on every opinion.
Basically, as Nick said, it's an intake meeting,
Mhm.
and we just listen and take notes.
Yeah,
But each of your meetings are open to the public, your regular
Oh, no,
schedule.
right.
So you'll get comments as you get going along.
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And this is, you know, a little more conversant than most boards or commissions, just because of the nature of the work. You know, we need to solicit the information from department heads and such to be able to make the informed decision.
Right.
Nick, we could schedule it in the multipurpose room on November 14th.
Yeah, I think that'd be wise.
Really?
Yeah, we'll just choose that room.
I mean, we did most of them in here last year, but it was a pretty full crowd.
full.
Yeah, I think it.
It's easy enough.
Yeah.
And then that way we're not, people aren't having to stand out in the hall or something.
Right, or have to try to move the meeting and lose the crowd.
Because I think we ended up doing that, didn't we, Nick? We had to move it to
We
GP?
we did move one, I think that was the last one, which was a big crowd in the multipurpose.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, are you okay with that? If you wanna have it here, that's fine.
No, I think it makes more sense to do it there, and if it's a smaller crowd, then we made the appropriate,
Okay.
Yeah, just push her.
You have heat there now, so it's be warm.
Good point.
So based on the last charter revision, was there anything like hot topic that we should expect to come up again?
Yes.
That didn't get included in the last one? I mean, obviously, some of the things that were recommended, I understand, but is there anything that hasn't been discussed that we should expect to hear?
We looked at the 4-year term.
Right.
In a couple different angles and different structures. But this is a much more, I think, clearer charge in terms of the 4-year term.
Yeah, last time, this was probably like an overreach. We were looking at a 4-year term and a 5-member board.
Yeah, it's
That's right.
yeah.
And so I think the double whammy just made people nervous, because a lot of people said, yeah, 4-year makes sense, but I don't know about this 5 thing.
Okay.
So, whatever.
And we went down, like I referenced earlier, the rabbit hole of every type of structure of governance. So we looked at Newtown as a legislative council. It's a legislative council, then a board of selectmen. So, and then, they're represented very different in terms of, legislative council represents their district, so it kind of eliminates part of the town meeting. But a lot of it is just really kind of unique to the community and become kind of more cumbersome as well in terms of the governance of it.
If you ever want to borrow my book, Local Government in Connecticut, you sign the title.
How big is the book?
It's only about like that. But it's
Fine print, right?
But it talks about all the different structures of local government, mayor, city council, town manager, duties and separations of planning and zoning, board of finance, and that falls under Connecticut law. It's interesting to me, but I'm kind of a government nerd, so.
Yeah.
If you wanna look through that anytime, it's pretty interesting.
So our next meeting though is just, the commission is not until December. So we'll have the
Yeah, so we'll do
November
November 14th and then
December 5th.
December 5th, yep.
Okay. Just
And-
making sure.
And then, then we're looking at January. Look at the full year here. Hold on, let me go to that one.
We do need to vote
So like
on
the
the
full-
public hearing, don't we?
Yeah.
Oh, make a motion.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'll make a motion to hold the public hearing on Wednesday, November 14th at 7 p.m. in the general purpose room of the Clifford G. Hurgen, right? Municipal Center? J. Hurgen. J. Hurgen. It's right in front of me.
I would love the second version.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I bring it to vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Passes unanimously. Yeah, so then we'll look at December 5th as well.
I just have a cough.
Do we need to vote on regular meeting nights, or we
We've
just?
already done
We
it.
did.
Okay, oh yeah, we did it the first time, yep, yep.
We need to do
In December, we'll vote on the regular meetings for.
That's the only way I drink water.
Yeah.
Every time I bring something to drink. Wine helps
Okay.
more, yeah.
That's what I'll
All right,
I'll do that next time.
It's dry.
I guess motion to adjourn?
So
Can I-
moved.
can I
I'm sorry,
just have
it's, yeah.
Two
it's-
minutes of the commission's time, and
Absolutely.
I wanted to apologize for here at the first joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen. Most of you guys know who I am, but for those who don't, my name's Nick Vitti. I serve as your committee's counsel, and I did serve that role in the 2012 charter revisions. Just a little bit of background, I'm a partner in the law firm of Case, Tush and Santagato, which is a firm located in Stamford, Connecticut. Do most of my work down in Lower Fairfield County, but have on occasion worked for the town, represented developers before the town and the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm kind of a generalist, so I do a lot of land use and development work, but also focus on real estate tax appeal litigation, and regretfully some family law too, where I do divorce and things of that nature. My role to you, you are the client, so the commission is the client, and I'm here to guide you through the legal process. There are a number of deadlines. Like I said before, your amendments cannot contradict state law, and they can go beyond state law, but they can't contradict state law, which is our statutory sections and the Connecticut Constitution. So anytime you have a question, I might not have it on the spot, but that's what my role is, to research that question and make sure we're not falling in contradiction to state law. With that being said, I think I was on the same email trail as you guys. The last commission, I had a number of members just emailing me questions, and I am getting paid for this position, full disclosure.
Yeah.
I would ask that maybe to limit, my time spent, maybe we filter those questions through the chairman and make sure we have a consensus on what's being asked to be legally researched, so I'm not spending inordinate amount of time on things that maybe this commission really doesn't want.
Yep.
Besides that, I did have, and maybe just for the record, this is just something I did not redo, but I did check to make sure it's updated, a little blurb on deadlines and adopting charter amendments. Just take a minute to read it when you have some time at home, along with maybe reading the entirety of this charter, because as you'll find, maybe that prompts some brainstorming on what else could be amended or revised. I think you probably went over it already, but you are required to consider the Board of Selectmen's charge, but you don't need to follow it, you don't need to put it to a vote, but you also do have carte blanche. You can add to this, you can change anything in here, and anyone with good editorial skills will probably find a couple grammatical errors still in this charter over the years, even though we have a new commission every 5 years. So take a look at the charter, take a look at my memo. To note, we need to be done as a commission, we have to have a draft report 16 months following your appointment. So we should kind of just build that timeline into the equation. This could be a process that does take years. We were 2012 commission, the amendments were 2 years later in 2014. So once you do have a draft report, a referendum has to be held within 15 months of a final report being had. So this is a long process, it's an important process. Take your time with it. It's actually fun, I enjoy it, so looking forward to it. That's it for me.
Thanks.
And just to highlight one of the things Nick said too, like we'll hear a lot of enthusiasm about the charter, and often it gets compared to the Constitution. It is not. And that's why Nick is on this commission, because we can't usurp the Constitution, whether it be the states or our federal governments. It's really, I think, a more accurate comparison is it's our bylaws, or our governing structure. That's why we meet so often to change them and amend them, and really just take a look at, are we making the best operational decisions, as a community, and keep it simple within those terms, and it makes it a much easier process. Okay. Any other questions, comments for the evening? No? All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
If we wanted to